Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. It's just about 6 a.m. and I'm on my way to work. I'm Kurt. I'm your host. Check my bike. Looking good. This is my trusty steed, the GSA. And we are off. About a 50-mile ride from Orange County to the Inland Empire here in Los Angeles. I do this Bible study every day in two parts. I first read the Bible. That would be the King James edition, the New International Edition, and a Jewish edition of the Torah, with commentary by a respected scholar named Rashi. His real name is Shlomo. I can't remember his last name. His nickname is Rashi. And I put all that together. I weave that together over the course of typically a week or two, sometimes 3 per chapter of the Bible, and then I make a video offering some commentary. Oops, I swung out too far. And that's today. Today I get to do the commentary, and that commentary today is on Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 16. This is the chapter that has to do with the manna from heaven and the quails. Oh, but a quick note about a disclaimer, so to speak. Although I study the Bible every day and I do it in earnest, I am nonetheless a non-believer. I don't believe the supernatural claims offered in the Bible, but I am very interested in understanding the stories and the ideas and the propositions. Heck, if I wind up in hell, I don't want it to be for lack of trying. So, and I try really hard to do this without ever appearing or sincerely being disrespectful. Although I will be honest if I think something is, doesn't make sense or is an absurd claim. I'll note that. But I'll try to do so in the most respectful manner possible, or at least the most sociable, most agreeable manner possible. Yeah. Okay, so at Exodus 16, this is the point in the story of Moses where the people have in Exodus 15, they've completed their, Exodus 14, they completed their crossing of the Red Sea and the subsequent destruction of the Egyptian army when the seas closed over that army in pursuit of the Israelites. In Exodus 15, we have the Song of Moses and Miriam, which is kind of a triumphant oral telling of the events of Exodus 14 and leading up to Exodus 14. Now in Exodus 16, it's been a little over a month since the flood. Not the flood, but since the crossing of the Red Sea, and the people led by Moses have now crossed from Elim. I believe that was the place. They've left Elim, which was like a well area, a couple of days out from the Red Sea, and I believe there were 12 wells and 12 palms there, which were representative and symbolic of the 12 tribes. Anyway, they've been about a month out from there, and their provisions are starting to run low, and they're crossing now into a land called the desert or the wilderness of sin. What an ominous name, huh? I wonder what the original inhabitants of that area thought about that name. And I did look it up. The people that were living there at the time were the Bedouin, who have been in that area for like 9,000 years, or was it 6,000? Anyway, it was a long time. Before, it had to be more than 6,000, because I remember when I first read it, I thought, wow, that's longer than the Earth's been around. So they were there before the Earth was formed and before the flood even. So wow, interesting stuff. But the Bedouin were there, and they had tribes all over the place, and the Bedouin people, of course, you know them today. They're famous for their elaborate, clothing and their customs, living there in the northern part of Saudi Arabia. So the people have crossed into the desert of sin, and if you look on a map, you can kind of see where that is, up there on the top part of the Sinai Peninsula, a little above where the Red Sea kind of peters out. It's not a very big area if the map I found is accurate. And that's where archaeologists should probably be doing their searching if they're looking for evidence of, 2 to 3 million people living in the desert. Not just 2 to 3 million people, 2 to 3 million Israelites living in the desert for 40 years. With really, it's interesting to think they would have nothing to do all day, because as we're going to learn, the manna falling from heaven left them, and the quail that arrived every night to sustain them, left them with basically, for lack of a better term, a free lunch. They were free to do their own thing during the day. So what were they doing with all the sheep and the goats and the cattle during that time? And what about the water? All kinds of questions that I've spent like 3 weeks on this, and I haven't come up with these questions. For example, if these are herdsmen and they did leave Egypt with their cattle, and I assume they brought those cattle with them into the desert of sin, what use for the cattle? Are they they can't use it as currency if they don't need to eat them, or to husband these cattle for any reason, or they don't need any money. What are they doing all day? What do people do when they have free time? They tend to get artistic, right? If you consult old Maslow's hierarchy of need, they tend to delve into philosophy, the pursuits of the leisure pursuits of the mind, philosophy and art and things like that. Interesting. You think for 40 years of a population of 2 to 3 million, assuming it was really that many, I read an account in the course of my last couple of weeks of study that suggested it was just the tribe of Levi that was up there, not the entire population of the Israelites, which would have reduced the population greatly. But that's not what it says in the Bible. It says 600,000 men, and you can extrapolate to the men and the women and the children and come to the 2 to 3 million. The scholars that I read that said about the lesser number said that 600,000 men was a later and inaccurate interpolation into the Bible by subsequent scholars. Wow, if that's the case, that opens a can of worms, right? I mean, okay, then what else has been inserted or corrected or changed or altered for whatever reason? Okay, let's not go down that hole. But for whatever reason, there still is no evidence of the Hebrews in the desert of sin. But let's stick to the story. So they arrive after a month of traveling from Elim, I think it was called Elim. They arrive now in the desert of sin, and the first thing that happens is they run out of food because they only had enough provisions. Apparently, they prepared some food before they left Egypt. And I'll get a note to that in just a second. Put a pin in that, because there's something special about that. I hope I remember. I probably won't. So let me just recite it right now. Well, let's just give myself a challenge. Okay, Kurt, this is your challenge to remember that you put a pin in the point about making food, making bread, namely, in Egypt just prior to departure from of the Israelites' departure. So I'll come back to that. I promise. So the people arrive in the desert of sin, and then now all the supplies that they had previously made are running out, and as usual, they are getting grousy, right? They're starting to what is it? The various Bible interpretations I read, what was grumble or complain, or basically, hey Moses, hey Aaron, now what are we going to do, right? I mean, at least if you left us in Egypt, we had as it was said in the King James edition, the flesh pots. What the hell? Excuse my language. What the heck's a flesh pot, right? Wow, that sounds kind of bad. What is it? A big pot sitting by the table full of cooked meat? Maybe. That's what they say, the flesh pots, and it makes it clear in the New International Edition that's basically we had meat to eat and bread to eat, all that we wanted, to our fill, as long as we stayed in Egypt. And so they're understandably upset. Now they got all upset before a couple of times about the same types of things, and then God always came through. It's just a wonder to me that they remain upset, especially when we learned that, remember the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that accompanied them through the initial part of their journey and confounded the Egyptians at the crossing of the river, and lighted the way for the Israelites as they moved through the parted waters. Remember that? Well, that thing stuck with them. It didn't go away. They still have the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, and it will be with them, and that is the presence of God himself. that will be with them for the remaining 40 years, and yet they still doubt. Sheesh. Okay, I won't say that. I just, the ingratitude. I mean, even me as a non-believer, I mean, if I was wandering through the desert and there was this pillar of cloud and this pillar of fire thing, and it had come through a couple of times to me and got me out of a bind, I don't really think that my stomach grumbling a little bit would cause me much concern. I wouldn't know what that pillar of fire and pillar of cloud is, but it looks like it cares about me, and it looks like it has the power to provide, and I would probably be satisfied. But at least that's me saying comfortably 2018 with a full tummy So maybe things would be different if I was in the desert of sin all that time back with a grumbly tumbly. So anyway, they're complaining, and Moses and Aaron are talking amongst themselves and about it, and then God intervenes and talks to Moses, and he's like, okay, I'm going to show the people that I'm going to take care of them. I want you to tell them, and this is complicated. It's really hard if you try to listen to this section of the Bible or read this section of the Bible. And by the way, I do both. I listen and I read, and then I try listening and reading at the same time. It's kind of fun thing to do. I like listen to it in the King James edition with all the, therefore and thous and whatnots, and then read it in the NIV, which is more common in current English. And it's a fun thing to do, to kind of piece it together and actively process as I'm reading as I go. But as I'm doing that, in this section, there's this complicated kind of a back and forth between God talking to Moses, who talks to Aaron, who Aaron talks to the people, who God tells Moses, go talk to the people yourself, and then Moses and Aaron talking amongst themselves. And then it's complicated. And they're telling the same thing over and over. It's like a telephone game. As God tells Moses, I want you to tell the people that I'm going to take care of them. They're going to have food in the morning and the evening. And Moses says, God wants me to tell you to tell the people that we're going to take care of them. We're going to have food in the morning and the evening. And then Aaron said to people, God told Moses, who told me to tell you that we're going to have food in the morning and the evening, is to stop your complaining. Okay, so it's like if you try to follow that kind of communication pattern, that phone game, and then sort of a whole bunch of thou fors and whatnots, that old language into it, it's a little hard to follow. But here's the basic gist of it. The people are complaining. God says to Moses, I'm getting a little tired of these people complaining, but I want you to tell them that they're going to be okay. In the morning, in the evening, I'm going to show my glory in the clouds, and then I'm going to provide them food in the evening, and then they're going to get some really yummy bread in the morning. And I want you to tell this to Aaron. And Aaron then says basically the same message to the people. And then meanwhile, while that's happening, God intervenes directly with Moses and says, and by the way, I want you to tell him additional thing. And Moses jumps in. I'm kind of imagining Moses, stepping forward to the crowd, put him, gently pushing his brother Aaron aside and saying, hold on, I got something to say. And they're basically saying the same thing every time. It boils down to, at risk of repeating myself, it boils down to this. I am your God. I will provide for you. I'm a little tired of you, the way you guys keep doubting me. I will be with you. You will see my presence in the evening. You will be fed meat in the evening, and you will be fed bread in the morning. Enough said. And then what happens is the quail arrive in the evening. But just before the quail arrive, the countenance or the presence or some image of God appears in the clouds in the east in the evening. I really wonder what that was. I wish the Bible was a little more descriptive. Was it just an incredible formation of clouds, or was it like could they see the face of God in the sky, kind of like the Sistine Chapel, reaching across, touching the finger of man, or risk of sounding disrespectful. I mean, kind of like, seeing Mary in toast or something like that. I don't mean that to be disrespectful. What I'm talking about, people see that. They'll see images in the clouds, right? Is that what it was? Or was it really God appearing almost like on a Monty Python skit, parting the clouds and like, here I am with the crown and the beard? I don't know, but that's what the Bible says basically happened. The presence of the God was seen in the east. Of course, that would be in the evening. That would mean that the sun would be setting the other way. Those would be darkened clouds in the east. And promptly thereafter, the quail arrive. Now just imagine that. A camp of 2 to 3 million, or a much lesser amount if you believe the story about the Levites being the only ones that left Egypt. They come flying in, and they settle, as it says in the King James edition, they settle upon the camp. And I imagine then the people, it's unspoken, but imagine that the people then, fall upon the quail. And that must have been quite a sight, because you know how quail are, right? I mean, they can fly a little bit, they can run really fast. And they were running all over the camp, and people are chasing them down, kids with baskets, mothers holding their skirts, and you got to insert that music. No, I'm sure it didn't happen that way. I'm sure that the quail landed on the ground and either just like immediately passed out dead, or the people could just walk up to them like kittens and pick them up. But still, they had to like wring their neck and stuff like that. So you can't get away from the harshness of it all. And good gosh, can you imagine all the waste? Can you imagine the waste of the millions of quail? And then while we're on the subject of quail, how in the world, okay, the manna thing, we'll get to that in a second, but how in the world did God sustain, let's go with the 2 to 3 million, because the other number has no backing in the Bible itself. It's just speculation from scholars. Let's stick with the 2 to 3 million, the 600,000 men and their families. And you've got enough, and quail are small birds, and they're even smaller in European quail, are even smaller than what we have here in California. And the quail arrive, and I've eaten quail before, and it's kind of like eating some small game birds. I mean, usually there's one bird per person, so you're going to need 2 to 3 million quail a day. Now, where are all these quail going to come from? So I looked it up, and it turns out that the breeding pair of quail can produce about 12 babies a year. Now, that's the production of 12 babies a year, but the babies that actually make it to adulthood are going to, of course, be a much smaller number. So, this is a desert, by the way. I don't think that level of fecundity can produce and sustain 2 to 3 million quails a day for 40 years. So that means that somewhere, somehow, quail are being miraculously, popped into existence. So, I mean, picture that. I mean, that's what's suggesting, but picture the reality. Maybe some distance off from the camp of the Israelites, there's maybe a little valley somewhere, maybe the valley of appearing quail, where quail are just popping into existence, pop, 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 and then running and flying off to the camps to surrender themselves to the pots of the Israelites. That's something that you've got to address if you're going to believe this. And that's an astonishing image, an astonishing claim. I don't think I believe it. So this is a strike against the Bible as a history, and a strike for it as either a myth or a legend. So now that's that. So the quail appears. So God appears in the clouds in the evening. The quail appears shortly thereafter. The people have a nice big feast in the evening. Lots of meat. What about their cattle? I mean, couldn't they slaughter their cattle? I imagine. And what are the cattle eating? It's a desert after all. Can they find enough grass? Complicated. Anyway, so they go to sleep with tummies full. And I wonder what they did with all the quail innards, but anyway, that's another matter, and that's not such a problem. And they would wake up the next morning, and what they find is that the dew has, as they say in the Bible, fallen. Now, we know the dew doesn't fall. The Bible describes it as falling like rain. It doesn't say rain, but it describes it as falling, the dew falling. And that kind of struck me, because the dew does not fall. It basically condenses onto surfaces of appropriate temperature due to factors of moisture in the air and the temperature and humidity of the air and the surface on which it congeals, it condenses. So that's interesting. But anyway, the people wake up and they find a layer of dew upon the ground everywhere. I mean, this is not just around the camp, but apparently it's all throughout the wilderness. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but the scholarship I read, the Jewish scholarship, indicated that was the case. And within that dew, there is a small white bit, a kind of round thing. And as the sun comes over the hill, it strikes the dew, which then rises into the air, aka evaporates, leaving behind the small white whatnot, which is the manna itself, a small little piece of, it's almost like a bread-like item. It's white like coriander with the taste of slightly honeyed bread. That's how the Bible describes it, actually. And then the people are like, what the heck? And so Moses steps in and says, this is it. This is the stuff that, God promised you. This is the manna. I want you guys to gather it up. And here's some rules, some simple rules. I want you to take 1 omar per day per person in the household. So if you've got 5 people in your household, I want you to collect 5 omar of manna. And you're going to eat that today, okay? And the way you're going to eat it is basically you're going to bake it. And then you're going to, as they say in the King James edition, you're going to seethe it, which I guess means boil. You're going to seethe it or boil it in water, just the amount that you need for your particular meal. So if you've got enough manna for the day, bake it all to kind of set it. I guess you can kind of squish it all together. I'm guessing about that. And then you've got like a loaf of manna. And then you can kind of either cut or pull apart just the amount that you need for each meal during the day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or however they eat. And then boil that bit for your food for that time. And Moses gives very specific instructions. You are to take no more or less than 1 omar per day. And you are also to not leave any leftover for the next day. So the people go out and they do that, and they take vessels, pots and bowls and whatever, the baskets, whatever they can, and they collect all the omar from all the manna from the ground. And some of them get a little more, and some of them get a little less than an omar. But that's no big deal, because the miracle occurs each and every morning. Because no matter how much manna you take, it'll be just 1 omar when you're done. 1 omar for each man or woman. So it's kind of like a miraculous a recalibration of the amount of omar, or not calibration, but reconciling of the amount of the quantity by God Himself each day. So then that's what they do. Now God also gives instructions. He says you will not leave any behind. And the Bible says that some did not follow those instructions and actually left some behind, and that the next day they found it was rotting with maggots, worms as it's called in the Bible, and also stinks. The Jewish scholar Rashi goes on to be very, very specific and says that it was of the 2 to 3 million people who were involved in this, only 2 of them didn't follow that instruction. 2 men, and I can't quite remember their names. They've got complicated names. They were the 2 that didn't follow that instruction. And how in the world did Rashi know that? How did he know not only that it was just 2, but they actually know their name? And the Bible says that Moses was wroth with them. A great word we don't use enough. Wroth, angry and frustrated. Like, why did you do this? And God's pretty pissed too. God just goes on and on about 3 times in this chapter. Goes on and on about how long are you guys not going to do what I'm telling you to do? And when are you going to start following my laws and my prescriptions? And I'm thinking, what laws and prescriptions? You haven't given any yet. But I'm starting to think He has. God has been telling Moses these things, but Moses has been kind of keeping them to himself. And that's just not my idea. That's, again, back to Rashi. Rashi suggests that as well, at least with regard to the Sabbath. That comes next. So the Sabbath, so Moses says you're going to do this every day, the quail in the evening, the manna in the morning, except on Friday, you're going to collect, well, it doesn't actually say Friday, it just says the day before the Sabbath, which is, in contemporary times, is Saturday, right, for the Jewish tradition. And these are the Jews, after all, so we would need to keep it in their context. It says on Friday, you're going to collect manna, and guess what? No matter how much you collect, it's going to be twice as much as usual. You're going to have 2 omar of manna for every person in your household versus 1. Even if you collected a normal amount, it's still going to be 2. Again, another miracle. This is a weekly miracle that's happened. So there's miracles all around going on right now. There's the pillar of fire and smoke or cloud that's hanging around out in the outskirts of the camp. There's the every day the miraculous manna appearing, and the doves are arriving for the slaughter, and then the reconciling or the redistribution of the amount of manna every day from God Himself, and then the day before the Sabbath, the doubling of the manna of whatever is taken. It's astonishing stuff. Now this kind of confuses the leaders, as they're called, of the people of Israel. And I imagine these are the leaders of the tribes. Not if you have that one proposition that it's just the Levites, but if it is, whoever it is, the leaders come to Moses and say, Moses, what the heck? We went and did our manna gathering on this day. They wouldn't know about the Sabbath, so they would say this today, which is going to be Thursday. We did it, and lo, we found that everybody's got double the amount. You said to just collect one omar, but everybody's got 2 omar. What gives? And Moses is then God's kind of looking over Moses' shoulder and going, kind of tisk. You know, I told you, and God actually says so. He says, Moses, how long are you going to fail to heed my laws and prescriptions? Again, like I said before, Moses is upset. It specifically says that. And that's when Moses fesses up. He says, okay, you guys got me. You guys figured it out. There's a reason for this double. Okay, tomorrow is God's day of rest. It's going to be called the Sabbath, and you guys aren't supposed to do anything. I mean, nothing. Not even flick a light switch. Like there were any light switches back then. Not to work or do anything. And I've got a whole list of prescriptions you're supposed to do, and you've got the double manna so that you won't have to collect. That's the reason. And I'm sure they were like, oh, okay, that explains it. Good. Get a day of rest. Now tell us about this list. Now, I didn't know all this stuff, but in the Jewish tradition, the list is quite long. I don't know if you've got any Jewish communities where you live, but I do, very close to where I live. And I often see the observant Jewish men and women walking through my neighborhood as a family on Saturday. And I learned from a Jewish friend that that's because they can't drive cars on Saturday, because that's the Sabbath, and that's implied. Of course, there were no cars. Moses isn't going to have on his list, don't drive your car, but it's going to say things like don't start a fire and stuff like that. And of course, starting up a car will, has the ignition and the sparks and stuff like that. And that's also why they won't use light switches, for the same reason. So anyway, and I'll tell you, I'm impressed. Although I don't agree that what they're, with the basic cosmology behind this whole stuff. I am impressed by those observant Jews who are willing to do that, to buy a house close enough to the synagogue to walk on Saturday so they don't have to violate God's laws. That's pretty impressive. They're taking it pretty seriously. If I believe this stuff, I hope I would be like that as well. So anyway, this long list goes on, and mainly the part that I was studying is about the limits of how far you can move. And if I can only remember a few things, but one of them was you can move no farther than 2,000, and I can't remember what it is. It's a measure that is basically 1 arm's length. So basically 2,000 arm lengths from your city, like 40 arm lengths, I'm making that up, 40 I think it was, from your house, and I guess 4 arm lengths from your body. How do you do that? I don't know. And you can't reach any further than an arm length. It's all this stuff, which some of them sound self-contradictory. Like, how do you venture 40, or 2,000 arm lengths from your city without first venturing further than the prescription of going from your house, in turn going further from the venturing further from your body, whatever the heck that is. You get it? So that's what Moses says. He says, okay, I got a reason, explanation for this. The manna, the extra manna on the Friday is for was to make ready for Saturday, which is the Sabbath. And by the way, guys, I don't want you guys to do anything, and here's this list. and so now we've got the prescriptions for the Sabbath. And apparently God was so upset with Moses about this, so upset, that he decided to rank Moses among the general sinners. He's no longer going to be special case with Moses. He's going to be a sinner just like the rest of us. Okay, so at that point now we have the we have the quail coming. The people are in the desert of sin. The quail are arriving every night. The manna is appearing every morning. And now we're going to set off on a 40-year adventure through time. And we all know that the reason for this 40 years is going to be because of the sinful ways, the doubting ways of the people, that God will prohibit the current generation, anyone from the current generation, to enter the land of the promised land. I think there are only 2 men that are going to be allowed to go, and Moses ain't one of them. And that job will be kept for Moses' successor Joshua. Come on in. Anyway, so then now begins a 40-year time, and for 40 years this occurs every day and night with the doves and the quail and the quail and the manna. Now there's a couple of details in there to point out. The Jewish people have done some interesting calculations, and they actually figured out the very day that the manna stopped falling, and that was, here, picture this. So that was the day after Moses died. So just before the people cross through the border of Canaan, across the Jordan River into the promised land, they're all camped there in the wilderness of sin, on the edge of the wilderness. Moses, clambers to the top of a low mountain called Mount Pisgah, which I think Pisgah means simply summit in Hebrew. And he looks across and he can see the promised land on the other side of the river. And he can see waving fields of grain and villages with cattle and children playing and schools and all the good stuff that's going on. And he says, that's it. That's the place for my people. That is the promised land. Footnote, never mind all the people who already live there. We got plans for them. And Moses then, sat with a satisfied sigh. I've done my duty. He, meanders back on down the mountain. This will be the last mountain for him to climb in his life. Back to the village, and then he dies in the bosom of Israel. The very next day, the manna comes. I believe that was the last day that the manna was gathered. So the manna would have been gathered that morning. People would not have known about Moses' pending death, because Moses was, meanwhile, starting his hike up the mountain, Mount Pisgah. And then the next day, the word is spreading all through the camp that Moses has died. There's no manna left. There's no manna that morning. The people are a bit in trouble. Joshua steps to the fore and says, "Men, gird your loins with your weapons. We're going to war." And off they go to cross the river. And I learned also that there was a miracle that happened at the crossing of the river, not unlike the parting of the Red Sea. So that was seen in Jewish tradition as a miraculous event. And remember that one footnote I promised to put a pin in that I wouldn't forget? And hey, I remembered. So here's the thing. So I told you before that the Jewish people did some calculations about figuring out the day that Moses died, when the manna actually stopped, and how long the manna actually ran. From the 40 years from the beginning, they actually know the day and the month when the manna started and the day that the manna ended. And they figured out that of those 40 years, they came up lacking 30 days. 30 days short. That would have been enough to starve the whole tribe of Israel to death, because they would have been without food. So where in the world, what did they do? How did they have the manna for 30 days that were not accounted for in the Bible? I have no idea how they did these calculations. But anyway, the Rashi says that to accommodate for this, God added a little bit of manna, or at least seasoned with the taste of manna, into the bread that the Israelites were making in Egypt just before their departure. So that the food that they took with them, remember, it lasted for about a month. The food that they took with them into the wilderness was indeed manna itself. And that fills the gap of the 30 days, and we have a nice accommodation of time. Now, that may be nice on paper, just like the paperwork of the Irish Archbishop James Ussher, who did the calculations back throughout the Bible, all the begats, to figure out that the world was created 6,000-ish years ago. Just like his calculations won him acclaim within the church of his time. it has no reason to think it's absolutely true. Actually, true sounds like interesting work, but not necessarily. Hold on. Thought I was going to sneeze. No reason to think that that's actually the case. I have no reason in reading Exodus 16. I have no reason to think that God added 30 days worth of manna taste to the bread of the Egyptians just prior to leaving Egypt. Now, of course, the Jewish scholars are more familiar with the entire breadth and scope of the Bible, as well as additional texts, including the oral Torah. So who am I to say? But there you go. Was there anything else? I don't think so. There was a lot in this chapter, and I spent a lot of time on this. I can't believe how much time I spent on this, and I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. There was a lot of writing. I produced a lot of writing on this one, and I'm really glad for this. Coming out the end, each end of these chapters, is such a great feeling. I really feel accomplished in this. Even though it leads me further and further into doubt and skepticism, literally my every chapter I finish leaves me with greater affirmation that my original doubt, the original reasons that I had to doubt that there's anything holy or connected, anything more than myth to any of this, is only reaffirmed with each chapter. And may I say that this consideration is made even more so by the fact that I'm doing this in a public setting, and no one seems to have anything to say about this stuff. I'm trying not to do it in a challenging way. I'm not going after people looking for a fight. I'm not trying to have any fights on Facebook or YouTube. Yet no one seems to have a word to say, which every time that happens, every time I make a well-considered research post about something, some observation, and then it's met with silence, then I'm further forced to think, wow, well, I must be on the right track. And it's a real disappointment, because I know that per the Bible, the believers are called to speak up and to give reasons for the joy in their heart. Literally, I think that's what it says in 1 Peter, 1 Peter 2:15 or something like that. It's in 1 Peter. God says that believers, Jesus says, believers are called to give the reason for the joy in their heart, to share that reason. And over, nobody ever does that. And it makes you think that either they don't truly believe, they don't truly trust their own ability to communicate, and why would they not trust it if they believe God's on their side, God's got their back, that God wouldn't be guiding their words and commenting? And why aren't believers doing this too? Why aren't believers, if they really are, confident in this, why aren't they getting on the soapbox and standing up, just the way God and Jesus asked them to do, to proclaim the truth, to witness as the Jehovah's Witnesses do? Telling you, it's thought-provoking. And in terms of my eternal soul, if there is such a thing, it's just making it more and more damned, because I'm finding myself leading further and further from, and there wasn't any. I mean, I'm basically, I wrung out the sponge of credulity, in terms of my suspicions about this thing. I don't believe there's any reason to believe this is any more than myth, any more myth than the other religions of the world. And that just gets reinforced every day. But I've gone on enough about that. Thank you. Sorry for the long post-amble, if there is such a thing. But it's been a good chapter, and I'm looking forward to moving on to chapter 17 and see what happens. I've got some alternate plans brewing in my mind about how I might handle things before I begin actually getting into the covenant law, the Mosaic law. I might want to take a bit of a side journey into some of the legal codes of the surrounding area that preceded the Mosaic law, just so that I have these in mind as I work my way through the law. It's going to take a long time. It's a long process, but a very worthwhile one. Certainly am enjoying it. Oh, last thing I'm going to say, I had this idea. I'm always looking for interesting things and topics to talk about with my family at dinner time, and I suggested last week that that I share with them what I'm learning in the Bible, and oh boy, did they rebel. Like, no, they don't want anything to do with that. And I haven't been able to live that down ever since. So I guess there'll be no Bible study at dinner time with my family. Well, take care, everybody. Thanks for joining me today, and have a great day and make it a good life. See you next time on Freeway Bible Study. Wow, almost made it all the way to work. This is a long one. See ya.